Today I'm going to tell you about the absolutely rudest thing that Korean people do without knowing in front of foreigners. So quite some time ago, I was driving some Korean friends around San Diego, as is pretty common because Korean people tend to not have cars in San Diego, even though it's super necessary. But basically the gist is I'm driving them around. We had just been hanging out with some other friends, and I'm taking all these four people home. So I'm doing them a favor, and they end up doing this absolutely super rude thing, which is they were all speaking Korean in front of me. And this is long before I know any Korean. And they don't even know that it's rude. And every so often, I would chime in. I'd say, hey guys, look, can you just speak English in front of me? Because this, it feels shitty to have you guys just gabbing in Korean, especially when I'm doing you guys a favor. It feels like, so unappreciative. And when I would say this, the Korean guy would look over at me and he'd say, oh no, don't worry about it. It's nothing important. And that's the thing, Korean people don't understand this feeling, because I don't think a lot of Korean people have ever felt this, because in Korea there's basically only two languages, English and Korean. And English is kind of an international language. So if somebody speaks English in front of Korean people, even in Korea, Korean people tend to think, oh, well, it's my fault. I don't know English well enough. I'm a bad person. So Korean people, I think, have almost never felt this feeling before, unless they've hung out with a lot of foreigners and traveled abroad a lot. Now, let me make a little comparison, because a long time ago, even before this scenario, I was in France for about 5 weeks going to an ohakdang. And the idea was that I was learning French. Really, I was just hanging out with other people. But most of the people at my ohakdang were Swiss German. I would say 90% were Swiss German, because they had to pass some tests and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go into it. But the point was, we would hang out 3 or 4 nights a week, getting drunk, having a good time. And when we did, it would be 10 to 15 Swiss German people and me. And because there was one non-Swiss German speaker in that group, they would all speak English. Now, the point of this ohakdang was that we're all going to be in France, we're all going to be from different countries, and we're all going to be forced to use French so we can finally communicate with each other. But that plan kind of backfires, because actually these Swiss German people thought of me as a really good way to practice English. So we'd end up speaking English quite a bit. Now, the really amazing thing is they would mostly speak English. Sometimes they would break into Swiss German, but not that often. Now, it's a group of 15 people, so oftentimes there's groups of people that I'm not really talking to, I'm not with, and they would speak Swiss German. But the immediate people around me, 3 or 4 or 5 people around me, they would pretty consistently speak English. Now, the thing about this is I can't really call them out if they start speaking Swiss German, because we're in France. Okay, you can't tell someone you're supposed to speak my language when you're in a country that's not your language's country. And so I would sit there, and when they would start speaking Swiss German, I'd just sit there and be like, look, okay, they got to do their thing, whatever, it doesn't matter. But then somebody else in the group would go, hey, stop. Gede doesn't speak Swiss German. This is super rude of us. And all of them would straighten out and go, oh my God, I can't believe, oh, I'm so sorry. They'd apologize. I'm so sorry, Gede. And the thing is, like I said, in Korea there's only 2 languages, but in Europe there's a lot of languages. You end up going to a country that's a 3-hour train ride away, and you're in a country with a new language, and there's many languages. And especially if you're in Switzerland, Switzerland has 3 official languages. So it's very common that you end up in front of people who don't speak your language. And so they understand this feeling of feeling really bad when somebody speaks a language from you that you don't understand. And honestly, it's a really natural feeling. Korean people know it very well if they ever experience it. It's just they've generally never experienced it. Now, when I was back in university, I used to help people at my university's ohakdang, and I would help with English. I didn't teach them, but I would just go in a couple times a week and speak English and have a little conversation with them, and that was supposed to help them with their English. And there was a Belgian girl in one of these classes, and she spoke French, and I spoke French. And it was upsetting to both of us, because right when the class would let out, we would go hang out on the patio or just outside, and Korean people would come up, our friends, and we'd all be sitting there talking, and then the Korean people would break into Korean. And me and my Belgian friend are like, because she's European and I've felt this a lot, we're both like, dude, this is some super rude shit going down. Like, what's wrong with them? So then I said in French, I said, hey, why don't we just speak French to each other and see how long it is before she gets super upset? There's just one Korean girl with us at that moment. And she said, okay, that's great. And we went on for about 20 or 30 seconds before my Korean friend, she just said, what are you guys doing? This is horrible. This is terrible. And she finally felt that visceral awfulness that you feel when someone's speaking a language you don't understand in front of you. And I did this just as an experiment to kind of show her what's going on, but this feeling is this ultimate feeling of exclusion. It doesn't matter if the Korean person is speaking Korean in front of me and it's not important what they're saying. It's just this feeling of exclusion. To give you an idea, imagine it's you sitting there with two of your friends. And imagine you guys are all speaking Korean, you all know Korean, everything's great. And then all of a sudden, one of your friends dips over to the other friend, just starts whispering something in your other friend's ears. That would feel terrible, trust me. I mean, I think you can understand that would feel terrible. And the reason it feels terrible is because it's this ultimate feeling of exclusion. It feels terrible. And we are humans that are made to befriend people and have lovers and all this stuff. We're very social animals. So when we get so directly excluded like that, it hurts and it feels bad. And the people are absolutely being rude. And I know Korean people are doing it on accident, but that's the whole point of this video is I'm trying to explain to you this very rude thing that Korean people do accidentally in front of foreigners in the hopes that you won't make that same mistake whenever you're abroad or having fun with other foreigners.